Hey everyone, welcome back to another podcast. Okay, right now I want you to go to our website, www.flippingthebarrel.com, and sign up for our newsletter. Y'all are going to love what we have coming up in 2023, and you cannot join it or see it if you're not part of the newsletter. So please go and sign up because you're going to learn a lot about our guests, like the one we have on today, who we're super excited about. His name is Matt Kolesar, and he is a 24-year veteran of ExxonMobil. He has spent the past year and a half as the chief environmental scientist, having first joined as an environmental advisor at the Baytown Olefins plant in 1998. He's since had a number of roles providing regulatory and technical oversight for the company's North America and global operations. He is an internationally recognized sustainability expert and is directly advising the ExxonMobil leadership team on environmental concerns, sustainability, and low carbon solutions. That's a really big job, Matt. Thank you so much for finding the time to join us today.
I'm honored to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Matt. So tell us a little bit about your life growing up. You grew up in Ohio, which was once known as the steel capital of the world, and you saw what happened to a town full of life quickly change once the steel industry moved away overseas and, they stopped manufacturing locally. This impacted your family's small local business as well as many others. What lessons did you learn growing up in this environment, and how did your childhood influence the person you are today?
Yeah, and I don't think I really appreciated it until much later in my life. But as you mentioned, we grew up in a very blue collar town, heavy industry, either steel or the industry that supported it, like railroad. And so nearly every family member, direct or indirect, had some tie to that, including we had a family business that my grandfather had started from scratch. That was an office and art supply store. And again, we saw sort of that rise and fall with the community, and ultimately went out of business when I was in high school. And so again, at the time, I just thought that was life, and that was the environment you grew up in. As I reflect back as an adult, particularly the career that I ended up in, which was always, I say, I'm literally in the job I've dreamt of. I didn't know what it exactly was or who it was for. But growing up in the steel industry, and I would say, given I'm in a sustainability role, an unregulated steel industry, pre-Clean Air Act, pre-Clean Water Act. And so one of the highlights as a kid is I'd ask my parents to drive me over the valley where all the steel industry was. And being a steel industry, all our bridges were made of steel that would go over rivers and valleys. And so we'd go over at night, and you could see the blast furnaces because they were largely uncontrolled. And it was just this optical, visual, and uncontrolled air emissions. And so particulates and sulfur dioxide prevalent. And so that really stuck with me, just on the environmental impacts. Even as a little kid, I remember, like, gosh, this is really something. But then to see really in a matter of my middle school and high school years, to see that city die essentially as industry left, and seeing our family business struggle and ultimately go out of business. You really, I think the life skill I got out of that was on how you need to manage your, be accountable, and you had to take control of what you wanted out of life. And again, I think that served me very well personally and professionally, but I didn't even know it at the time as a little kid. I just sort of saw that come and go.
Did you ever think that you would be doing what you're doing today as far as, you as a little kid, you were there, you were seeing that going on? Did you ever have like the thought of like one day I'm going to change this?
I No, I wasn't that sort of, I don't know, I wasn't that intelligent or mature. I always had what I do remember is, the interesting part of my hometown, Youngstown, Ohio, was it had all this heavy industry, but it was also based, as most industry was established, is near waterways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful community, absent the pollution I just described, but it was based in, had great parks, and at one time had great wealth. So had some beautiful infrastructure. So I always had a passion for that. I became a runner early in my life, and we'll talk about that at some point. Um, So I did have a really strong appreciation for nature, and I
Mhm.
saw the impact on nature. I don't know that I was, as an 8-year-old, like, I'm going to do something about this and become a chief environmental scientist for an energy company. But certainly in reflection, that's made very strong impressions on me.
Mhm. I do remember you were talking about how your perspective changed at the age of 16 when your dad unfortunately passed away. You started demanding more from yourself, both at school and in athletics, which led to you for receiving an athletic scholarship for running at the University of Akron, where you studied
Akron,
chemical. Did I say that correctly? How do you
keep
say it,
going.
Matt?
Akron.
Akron. Okay. Where you studied chemical engineering. And you were trying to keep up with engineering and athletics. And you also had this pressure that you put on yourself because of, always wanting to perform. You finally caught a break. So you went to your engineering, you're doing chemical engineering, and you went to the guidance counselor at the university. And she actually was able to get you an internship with Goodyear. Can you take us back to this time in your life and how you built resilience through these difficult moments?
Yeah, and I don't want to undersell myself. I wasn't like the most ambitious. I was a good student and a decent athlete, but certainly to see my father passed away when I was in high school and he was in his 40s, and it was obviously an impactful event on anyone's life, but just to see his life cut short and all the things that he could have achieved and the impact on the family, it really struck a chord in me, and really hasn't stopped on I'm going to get more out of my life and not be average at anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I ended up, I have a high school daughter, and so I always tell her, I'm like, hey, I never got another B in my life until I got to college, which is the point of your question. And I was able to get an athletic scholarship. I ran track and cross country at Akron. Um, but it wasn't a great mix to try and basically compete full year, full time, and be an engineering student. There weren't many of me, at least at Akron. Certainly there are others that have achieved that, but to miss class, traveling around the country to compete, all year, and to be chronically tired and working out 3 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
really didn't go well with engineering. And so I struggled. And yeah, in my junior year, I saw my peers, my academic peers, starting to get job offers, co-ops or internships, and starting to get this really sharp vision of post college. And I found myself trapped in like, wow, I'm an average athlete and I'm an average student, and something's got to give. Yeah. So you mentioned really out of desperation, I went and saw our administration that managed co-ops and interns, and I said, hey, listen, I appreciate I'm not the best student here right now, but I've got all this extraneous stuff going on that's atypical for most of our engineering students. And yeah, the team took a chance on me and really put themselves out on my word and on their word, got me an opportunity with Goodyear, which is where their global headquarters is. And so what I got from that was, one, that people took a leap of faith on me, and I thankful to this day that they did that. I mean, it changed my life. But I felt like I owed them something, both the handful of people that put their neck out for me, and the
Mm-hmm.
university that I was going into Goodyear with that pressure and accountability to prove them that they made the right decision. So it really reinvigorated, and not that I was starting to be a slack student. I just were overwhelmed with trying to be a collegiate athlete and travel the country and be a top engineering student, competing against people that did not do that. And so it
Yeah.
worked out really well. The co-op went very well. Again, I was motivated by trying to reward the people that took a chance on me and make sure they knew they made a good decision. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, Goodyear offered me a position a year later, a full-time position in Akron at their global headquarters in a research role. And then they moved me very quickly down to Houston, um, which started my sustainability career.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. And For anyone going through any struggles, whether it's in school or in your career, I think what's important and what you mentioned is you asked for help. Which a lot of times we try not to. We try to just do it all on our own, balance everything together. And like you mentioned, you realized I can't be 100% the best athlete. I can't be 100% the best student. And so it was nice that sometimes we do have to take a little bit of a step back, look outside the picture and ask for help externally. Because like you mentioned, it did change your life. That's what got you into Goodyear. And then we're going to see how that got you into Exxon. But while you were at Goodyear, like you mentioned, it did open up your path to sustainability. And what was really interesting is that in 1989 is when they decided to start corporate sustainability group for their plastics division. And you were selected to work in that part of the business. Which, by the way, I think that's really cool. I don't think a lot of people might know that some companies in '89 were already thinking about the future. So that's nice. If you could tell us a little bit about what those initiatives were back then. And what's interesting too is when you started to work at Goodyear within the sustainability group, you also had several meetings with Exxon. Now, please explain how Exxon and Goodyear had anything to do with each other. Very interesting. And then that's kind of what led you into Exxon. So two-part questions to this too is, what was your thought about the oil and gas industry at the time that we now, like to say energy industry, but back then it was probably very heavy oil and gas. What was your thought about that?
Yeah, and I'll be really honest. I mean, the broad energy industry, both in college and when I started for Goodyear, particularly in Ohio, where there's not, at least at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, there wasn't a strong energy industry presence. The Marcellus Shale wasn't really a thing yet. So I was kind of ignorant other than beyond service stations in my early career with Goodyear. But my interaction subsequently when I moved to Houston, which is the engineers' playground, and we were collaborating on a lot of common issues amongst all the heavy industry, particularly in the Houston area where there's so much concentration of industry. And really Exxon at the time was and still is, and something I'm really super proud of and something I still work on to this day, things I was working on in 1991 on air emissions and air quality, water scarcity. And so as Goodyear, and we had a staff of 2 at a facility, every place that we would go to collaborate, whether it's a regulatory framework or to meet with policymakers, Exxon was there, and they had twice as many people, and they were twice as smart as anyone else in the room. And I remember I'd come back to my boss, and I'm like, man, thank goodness Exxon is there, because I'm just going to have to trust what they say, because I don't have time. We weren't staffed to sort of manage these broader futuristic issues on sustainability at the time, again, early 1990s.
Mm-hmm. And when you, like, your perception of Exxon and how you felt, I remember you telling me that like you thought they were just like the smartest people in the room, they knew everything. And then when you actually now that you've been with Exxon for 24 years, what do you think now being in that environment? And it's such a competitive environment as well. And you've had the opportunity to move up from operations to environmental advisor, sustainability manager, and now like the leading role reporting, into the CEO. What's your feeling on kind of your first perception to now actually being with Exxon, and just how did you continue to stand out? Because we know, like, we've all heard how competitive Exxon is.
Yeah, and that's, a story I tell particularly younger people here. And the opportunity to work for Exxon came about through a recruiter who reached out to fill an opening as they were expanding the facilities. And I was just looking for a better opportunity. And again, Exxon was sort of always a dream organization for me, just because they seem to have such competent, engaged, and the fact that they committed people to working on some of these leading issues always was very appealing to me. And when I started in the Baytown, which for those of your listeners that aren't familiar with Houston, ExxonMobil has this massive petrochemical facility on the east side of Houston in Baytown that has a refinery and multiple chemical plant operations. And so to get an opportunity to work there was, again, an engineer's dream on just opportunity. But I really struggled. I was overwhelmed by the talent and the drive and the competitiveness. And my wife will tell you, I didn't think I was going to make it. I thought, I don't belong here. This is too fast. They're too smart. Um, and I know people are somewhat critical that ExxonMobil was too competitive. And I never felt like that. I just felt like I was overwhelmed. I was like, this isn't a fair fight. I'm not ready for this. And I went and talked to my manager about it, who didn't know me, right? I was new to the company, and I still never doubted my technical aptitude, and I was brought in to do air quality management at the time. The people were just so passionate and wanted to win and not, beat Matt or beat, Sally. It was, hey, ExxonMobil has this vision, even if it was in your department, I want to be more energy efficient, or I want to enhance production 5%. They were going to do it, and they were going to do everything they knew. And we only hired the very best and the smartest students that had, really strong cultural dimensions. So it was not an easy transition, and not that Goodyear was some slouch organization, right? It's a global, internationally recognized, been around for 150 years. And it wasn't overnight. It was like a year and a half that I really struggled and reflected every day on my drive home, like, yeah, this is a mistake. And so it was really just, and it was just that, it was just persistence on trying to leverage past experiences where I was able to sort of dig myself out and say, Matt, you can do this. And again, I don't know if this will resonate with your listeners, but being in competitive athletics and sort of chronically chasing people, literally chasing people and saying, I can be better, and challenging yourself. I had to leverage that and say, Matt, come on, you've done harder things than this. But again, it wasn't overnight, and it wasn't ever easy. And it's still not easy.
Thank you for sharing. I think a lot of us relate to what you're saying when we first show up, to a new role in a new company, and you really, really do realize, wow, everyone's really smart. How am I ever going to be better than them or get a promotion when, everyone's hungry, especially early on in our careers for that next step, for that next career. And so that must be difficult. I can totally understand you on your drive home just saying like, gosh, I'm going to stay at this level forever. What is one piece of advice that if you can go back in time and give yourself, what would that be? And now that you're chief, scientist at Exxon, you've obviously were able to be very successful in your climb. What is maybe one thing that you think it took you a long time to do, but was very important, whether that's networking, whether that's asking for a role, maybe what were maybe a few things that you learned later on in your career that maybe you would have done earlier?
Yeah, and honestly, we've already touched on it a bit. It was to ask for help, and not and right, and I think we all resist doing that because it shows or perceived weakness or confidence or lack of understanding. And so, particularly in the energy industry, which is, and it's not just ExxonMobil, I think industry at large is very competitive, and it's got all these external pressures to be better, right? There's never a stagnant day in our industry. And so I think people are hesitant to do that. And I certainly was, particularly coming in as an experienced hire into the organization, which was not typical within ExxonMobil. They were very, and still very proud for homegrown talent and development programs. And so as I reflect back, that was one of the things I wish I'd have done more of, right? Particularly as I was surrounded by this wealth of talent and technical expertise, and I didn't leverage it enough. And I think that slowed me down. But what I think I did well, and what I tell the young folks here is, I know you get frustrated, right? Particularly early in your career, you may not see either the pace or advancement, or you're not in the right role, or there's something else I ultimately want to go do. I mean, this industry, there's so much to learn. It's such a diverse opportunity space. So what I think I did really well as I wanted to be a master of what I was given to do, and I wanted to be better than anyone else on the planet, even if it was doing daily reports on air emissions. I was going to be an expert. And I always tried to be, to the extent I could go read, or I never really had great vision of this role. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know this role existed until about 10 years into my career. But I read everything I could in my spare time on what else does this company do, and what are the challenges for the industry.
Mm.
And I still do that every weekend. And again, I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. It's not the best way to spend your weekends, but it's something that's always interested me.
Well, it shows that you're really working within your passion. And, today you're really focused on advocating for policies and creating ESG strategies to lead and advance the global transformation that we've all, been heavily aware of and involved in. How have you seen sustainability evolve over time? And do you think energy companies like Exxon are the ones to lead the pack in solving these challenges?
Yeah, it's transformed significantly. Society's expectations on our industry continue to grow, and as they should, and we're up for it. And I say we, I think the industry, and certainly ExxonMobil wants to be an active participant in the transition. And I think, again, not to plug ExxonMobil, but the beauty of a company at our scale is these gigaton problems are going to take gigaton solutions. And I think just here in the last year or so, we've shown where we can sort of flex our scale and scale sort of geography, the capital, the talent of people that we have at our disposal. And I would argue our industry has at our disposal. And right, we've made announcements to grow a significant greenhouse gas hub in Houston. And, we've got certainly our Baytown facility is going to be an active part of that, but we're going to set that structure. So as companies or utilities want to decarbonize, we're going to sort of set the infrastructure for that. We just announced a project in Louisiana to help a fertilizer plant decarbonize and use some of our sequestration and pipeline capacity to that. So I think we're starting to show, and we're seeing it really throughout the industry, that, hey, we're solution providers here. We're not just fossil fuel companies anymore. All the skills that we have accumulated over 130 years are still relevant, and the world needs us to provide these solutions like biofuels, hydrogen, carbon capture and sequestration. So, and ExxonMobil, and again, I've seen a lot of industry really step up to be part of the solution.
Thanks for sharing, Matt. So a little bit of a different topic that we're always very interested to find out about is, 24 years at Exxon, you've seen a lot, just different generations, different things going on globally, more and more women coming into the industry. As someone, as chief scientist, there's been a lot more women coming into STEM careers and getting their masters and PhDs, and just so many smart, talented women in science. What is something that you've noticed over the last few years, or things that maybe we can keep doing better to keep promoting women to get to certain levels, like a chief scientist, for example? Because, we've looked at the data, and there are more and more women who have those titles now and who have the education background and experience, but they all seem at some point, to drop off mid-career, whether it's because family or because they have other priorities in life, and they kind of just drop off in their careers. What have you noticed in your 24 years of maybe colleagues that you thought, were way smarter than you, let's say, or could have got a better promotion, that you maybe noticed held them back? Was it either things that they did themselves or just different priorities? Or do you think, it's the environment in which corporate still is, where maybe it's not as flexible? Things are changing, but maybe flexibility wasn't a thing back, 20 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah. I'm excited that it's going in the right direction, and I'm fortunate in the sort of the network of teams that I work with. I think we have a really great balance and some amazingly talented women that are making significant contributions to society, not even just ExxonMobil. I guess one of the positive changes I've seen, and there's probably dozens of influences why this is getting better. I think when I think early in my career, even at the very start with Goodyear, we certainly aspired to have diversity inclusion, and we talked about it, but it took a lot of time, and I don't think we all fully recognized the unconscious bias and sort of the unintended barriers that were in place that you mentioned. I think one of the big things that we've seen recently is we've seen women move into leadership positions, both within our company. And again, I'm in the sustainability field. So as I've been monitoring the COP27 in Egypt over the last week and a half through social media and the media, and you see entire panels and entire meetings of women leaders in our industry. And that's gotta have just a tremendously positive influence.
Mhm.
And they're incredibly effective groups. So it's not certainly nowhere, it's not an accident that those
Mhm.
women are leading this transition or significant part of it. So that has to be a very positive signal back to men and women. Um, and I would say my leadership style is far from perfect. I am often disappointed in myself when as a matter of fact, on my whiteboard right in front of me, I have the words unconscious bias to remind myself how not smart I am sometimes. By the definition of the word, right? You don't always see it.
Yeah.
And so when
We,
you see it,
even us women have it. Everybody
Yes,
does at
everybody
some
does.
point, but it's recognizing it, like you mentioned.
it's got to stay top of mind. I think it's just going to take time for culture. And again, not to say that we shouldn't actively work on it. And certainly our company, and I think our industry, um, is actively engaged in it. And you're starting to see it take physical manifestations with females in very senior leadership positions. And I actually am really proud, I would say, in the energy transition, the sustainability space, and I don't know what aspect of that is driving this, it's, and I don't know the math, but it is dominated by women leading this effort. I mean, I know your podcast here isn't sustainability related, but the fact that you two are doing this is another positive sign.
No, thank you so much for sharing that, and especially sharing that unconscious bias that you recognize in yourself and that you constantly have to remind yourself. And we have to agree with you. We have definitely seen the sustainability space really inundated with women. And what I feel like it's done is opened up another opportunity to bring those women that are leaders in the industry into bigger roles by creating a whole nother thing for them to be able to do and accomplish. So I think it's really refreshing, and it's really awesome to see. But one thing that we kind of want to go back to is like your work-life balance, because you've talked about the pressures you put on yourself. You've talked about, you're reading on the weekends, and we know you have a daughter who's really competitive in volleyball, and you never missed a game. So can you like share with our listeners, how are you able to manage your schedule? Because working, especially for big corporations, you can be on Teams meetings all day long. So what's some advice that you can give on how to make sure that the things that mean the most to you, you make sure you have the time for?
Yeah, and you just said it. And so, and when we talked earlier, the joke is, and I get to deal with people all over the country and all over the world in external engagements. And I would say there's probably hundreds of people all over the world that know my daughter's volleyball schedule, and have known it for 8 years as she's, competes year round and travels around the country. And, the second a schedule comes out, either through school or through her travel teams, I block my calendar. I send emails out to people, and I'm like, I don't care unless it's something extraordinary. I'm not doing it. And so certainly it resonates with people, right? I think people appreciate that, that's really important to me. And I make that very clear that that's very important to me. And no one really can take exception to that. Um, except maybe my daughter, who's like, oh my gosh, Dad, quit talking about volleyball so much. And maybe the people that sit around me, if they ever want to lose an hour of their life, ask me about volleyball. It's just setting a priority. And it hasn't come free or cheap. I mean, there's times where I've missed meetings that I probably shouldn't have, that I wanted to be at. And there's times where I've had to work, all night long, or on airplanes or buses or in, auditoriums. And Jamie, right, the environment that is, with whistles and crowds and
That
bad
can be
food.
hard.
And then I guess just one extraordinary story. I did miss a game, a really big game for her, when she was 11, which,
You
sort of
still remember.
controversially, can you have an important big game at 11 years old? But it was a meeting in Europe, that I couldn't miss, and I needed to. So I literally watched the first 5 minutes of the game, and then I took an Uber to the airport, but I ordered Wi-Fi on the plane for $35. So my wife could text me the scores. And I remember screaming on the plane because they ended up winning a big game. And I was somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean.
I
love
So
that.
love
I
this
did miss a
story.
handful of games, but that one particular, which was a big game, I made my wife text me for 3 hours.
I
That's so
love that.
awesome.
I love that. One thing that I really like about what you mentioned about blocking your calendar, letting your teams know what's important to you, I think that's such a different kind of leadership style, and we're seeing it more and more now with just this new generation of work, where it's okay as a leader to show that you have things outside of work and that are important to you. Because I think like back in the day, it was, you couldn't even say like, I'm gonna go pick up my daughter from school as a man. It was always like looked down upon, while as now it's cheered on. You know, if I have a manager that says, hey, at 4 o'clock, I gotta go pick up my kids. And for me, it's really nice to hear that, you know, he's being involved in his family business, but also it gives me the freedom to say like, hey, I also, you know, need to take my daughter to school. Or it really gives employees that sense of just feeling involved. And I think there's nothing better than leaders who are open about what's important for them, because it sets such a good example for us. So I love that you shared that, and that you're like very proud of it. And you're not, I think sometimes people would be ashamed of just like, I want to go to my daughter's game because maybe back in the day that wasn't a good leadership quality, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's and I am very proud, and I'm really open about it because I'm not going to miss it. It's super important to me. It's, she's my only child, and it's just great fun, and something I'm really proud of her for. And I do think it's important that I'm open about that for the people I work with, and to the extent people look up to my style, both technically and professionally, and how I manage culture issues. And that's why I've been so open about it. I said, you know what, my daughter has a game today on the other side of Houston. I'm leaving at 3 o'clock. But it's not a free pass either. Like I said, I'm typically back on my laptop at 9 o'clock.
And you're reading on weekends. So
Yeah.
it's a give and take,
So
you know?
it is a give and take. And, COVID taught us anything. We as a society can adapt and manage time. And I like your examples, right? And I see that all around me here, and it doesn't need to be even family, right? If I say I'm going to go read a fiction novel in my car for 30 minutes, that's good. Go do it.
Yeah, it's appreciated. Well, okay. So for the last question is, you mentioned that there was a quote that you really, really liked and that you still use today. It says, "Go out front where you belong." What does this mean to you, and how has it driven your career?
Yeah. So I was a runner in high school and college, but in high school, I was part of a program that was prolific and had phenomenal success, really leading up to when I, became active in the program. And my predecessors were really talented, some of the best runners in the country. And we had a sort of a Hall of Fame coach, and he was very big into motivational speaking. And so particularly in cross country, and for those of you who aren't familiar with cross country, right, you all start on a big line in a field somewhere, and the gun goes off, and you all just sprint and chase each other for 3 or 5 miles. And no matter what event we were running at, whether it was the best runners in the state or some really bad team, he's like, "You guys need to go out front where you belong." And it was a running term, but we joke that I say that to myself at least once a day. And what I draw from that is really, it was a confidence thing. Like, hey, you belong here. And you need to have the confidence to go out and test yourself. Which in a running context makes perfect sense. But in a life context, when I'm doubting myself and I'm in a tough situation, which, even at this role every day, you're sitting like, gosh, am I making the right decisions here? Am I giving the right guidance to the organization? Or am I the guy to be doing it? Do I have enough information? Have I talked to enough people? Am I smart enough to do this? I have to remind myself, I'm like, Matt, go out there, go up front. And the other part of it is, again, way too many cross country anecdotes here, but the other part of running, which is so unique, particularly cross country, is you're certainly out there on your own, right? It's you against yourself, against the clock. But at the end of the day, it's a team sport, right? There's 5 of you that score, and so you're always running like, I need to go get that next guy on for my team. So go out front where you belong was not only, hey, go push yourself and be confident, but it was, hey, go be accountable to your team. And that's the part that I tell myself every hour, like, hey, Matt, go push yourself to give the right thing, but what's best for your team? and how can you help your team, and how can you help this organization? So it's funny, we used to tease our coach when we were in high school because he would tell us that. We're like, I have no business being out front, right? I'm running against the best runners in the country. I will finish multiple minutes behind them, but he believed it and he wanted us to believe it. And I don't know that we bought in then, but certainly as a life lesson, it's served me very well.
Well, Matt, I think that was just a great ending and a great quote for all of us to just really take back and really think about, because I think just in my daily life, I'm going to be like, go out front where you belong, Jamie, like keep going. So thank you so much. It's really inspirational. You have such a great story, and you really sharing too, just even, the really depths of just the relationship with your daughter and what you did there, and how even in the role you're in today, like none of that held you back. Like you still took time to really be there and be present, and it didn't hold you back. And I think that's really important for those who think that they have to literally give their life to work if they want to be successful. And that's just not healthy, and it's not a way to really, run a career. So just thank you so much for just being so open and honest today. We appreciate your time.
Very good. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.